A single material used quietly for decades in hospitals, water systems, and industrial design is now being discussed in a very different context, inside the walls of homes, with claims that it could stop mold before it ever begins. Not a chemical spray, not a dehumidifier, just a conductive metal with well-documented antimicrobial properties. The idea sounds simple, but the implications, scientific, regulatory, and legal, are anything but. But here's the question. If a low-cost material could significantly reduce mold growth in homes, why hasn't it become a standard requirement in building codes? Share your answer in the comments below. According to published scientific literature, copper has long been recognized for its antimicrobial properties. Studies in controlled environments have shown that copper surfaces can disrupt the cellular structure of certain bacteria and fungi, leading to reduced survival rates. This phenomenon is often referred to as the oligodynamic effect, a process in which metal ions interfere with microbial life at a microscopic level. Hospitals in several countries have experimented with copper-coated surfaces to reduce infection risks, and some results have indicated measurable decreases in microbial contamination. However, it's important to distinguish between controlled laboratory findings and real-world applications. Mold growth in residential environments is influenced by a range of factors, including humidity, ventilation, temperature, and building materials. According to official housing and environmental guidelines, moisture control remains the primary method for preventing mold. Agencies, such as public health departments, consistently emphasize ventilation, leak prevention, and humidity management as the most reliable strategies. The claim that one copper cable eliminates all mold forever does not appear in any verified regulatory or scientific standard. Instead, what exists are narrower findings suggesting that copper surfaces may inhibit certain microbial growth under specific conditions. In my legal analysis, the gap between those findings and the broader claim is where regulatory scrutiny becomes significant. From a regulatory standpoint, products or systems that claim to eliminate mold fall under various consumer protection and environmental laws. In the United States, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency regulates antimicrobial claims under the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. Any product marketed as preventing or eliminating mold must meet strict testing and labeling requirements. One interpretation is that if a copper-based system is marketed with absolute claims, such as eliminating all mold permanently, it could trigger enforcement actions if those claims are not substantiated by comprehensive evidence. Another perspective raised in regulatory discussions is that building materials themselves are not always classified as antimicrobial products unless specific claims are made. This creates a nuanced legal environment where the same material may be unrestricted in one context but regulated in another depending on how it is marketed. Courts would likely examine the intent of the manufacturer, the language used in advertising, and the scientific evidence supporting those claims. Historically, innovations in construction materials have often faced delays in adoption due to the structure of building codes. These codes are developed at state and local levels, often based on model codes created by independent organizations. Changes require extensive review, testing, and consensus among industry stakeholders. Even widely accepted technologies can take years, sometimes decades, to become standard practice. There is no constitutional issue such as a Second Amendment implication in this context, but regulatory authority still intersects with broader constitutional principles. The federal government's role in regulating interstate commerce allows oversight of marketed products, while states maintain authority over building codes and housing standards. In my legal analysis, any attempt to mandate or restrict a material like copper in residential construction would need to align with these jurisdictional boundaries. Fourth Amendment considerations are unlikely to apply directly, but enforcement mechanisms, such as inspections or compliance checks, must still adhere to established legal standards. Fifth Amendment concerns could arise if a regulation were interpreted as imposing undue economic burdens without clear public benefit, though such arguments would depend heavily on the specifics of the policy. In terms of real-world impact, the idea of integrating antimicrobial materials into homes is not new. Copper plumbing, for example, has been used for decades partly due to its durability and resistance to certain forms of contamination. Extending that concept into mold prevention, however, requires a broader understanding of environmental conditions. Mold is not solely dependent on surface material. It thrives in moisture-rich environments. Without addressing underlying moisture issues, even antimicrobial surfaces may have limited effectiveness. For homeowners, the practical consequences are straightforward. Installing unverified systems based on exaggerated claims could lead to financial loss, unresolved mold problems, and potential legal issues if those systems do not meet building standards. Non-compliance with local codes can result in fines, insurance complications, or difficulties during property resale. This is not a hypothetical concern. Real estate transactions often involve inspections that flag non-compliant modifications. Supporters of copper-based solutions argue that integrating antimicrobial materials could provide an additional layer of protection, particularly in high-humidity environments. They point to existing scientific research as a foundation for further development and suggest that innovation should not be slowed by overly cautious regulation. Critics, on the other hand, emphasize the importance of evidence-based standards. They argue that claims must be rigorously tested in real-world conditions before being widely promoted. From a legal perspective, this caution is reflected in consumer protection laws designed to prevent misleading or unsubstantiated claims. In my legal analysis, the political and regulatory reality suggests that such technologies are unlikely to be forbidden in a literal sense. Instead, they are subject to the same processes that govern all building materials and health-related claims. Courts would likely support reasonable regulation aimed at ensuring safety and accuracy while allowing innovation to proceed within those boundaries. The phrase "forbidden science" often emerges in public discussions when there is a gap between emerging ideas and established standards. In many cases, that gap is not the result of suppression, but of the time required for validation, regulation, and consensus. That distinction matters, particularly when evaluating claims that affect health, safety, and financial decisions. Looking ahead, the long-term implications depend on continued research and transparent testing. If future studies demonstrate consistent, real-world effectiveness of copper-based mold prevention systems, regulatory frameworks may adapt accordingly. If not, the technology will likely remain a supplementary measure rather than a primary solution. This is for informational purposes and not legal advice. The goal is to understand how science, law, and regulation intersect, not to promote or dismiss any specific product. Given the facts, do you think claims like this represent a breakthrough that's simply ahead of its time, or do they highlight the risks of oversimplifying complex scientific issues? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you want clear, fact-based breakdowns of emerging technologies and the laws that shape them, consider subscribing. Because understanding the difference between innovation and regulation is what allows you to make informed decisions in a rapidly changing world.